Hi there, welcome to the Alpha Wave Trader week ahead. We've had a bit of an exciting week last week, of course, with the US-China trade spat coming to a head. The tariffs have gone ahead, and there was mumblings over the day on Friday that things were going to get cleared up at some point, so we had a rally in the markets, but really it is not a good sign for the short term, this breakdown in talks. I think there will be some follow-through selling to come ultimately, and just interesting to note quickly here that Bitcoin has taken off like a rocket over the last few days. So over the weekend was already coming back to life since the start of the year. You can see the lows created at the end of the year around 3,000, and now approaching mid 7,000s. So a really huge move, but that acceleration I'd say is related to money trying to get its way out of China. That's my guess. With capital controls in place over there, difficult to get money out of yuan these days. I'd say there are a few people hitting the sell button and buying some Bitcoin just in case things start to unravel. So that's an interesting sign of what's going on over there. I think it's worth turning our attention to the E-mini S&P 500 because that really is where the action is for us. Of course, we have the Australian election coming up at the end of this week. I think that's a pretty huge swing factor for us. I think if Labor gets in, watch out. So this week could be pretty interesting if there's going to be some fund managers lowering their risk profile in Australia ahead of the election, and if we have US markets getting dumped, it could be pretty interesting what develops from here. And I just want to make the note, really the main point for today, with the E-mini S&P 500, the huge rally over the last few years. We've got these little slight false breaks. This just gives you a sense of how markets can behave, of just taking out a new high and then failing, creating the false break, and no reason why it can't do it again. And we've just had a retest of the high. And the thing I want you to note is that last week was a weekly sell pivot. And I was saying if it closed below 29.01 on the week, that would be a sign of weakness. We did see some quite heavy selling over the week, but then prices ended up rallying and actually closing back above that 10-week moving average that you can see there. So, still thinking that there's buying pressure due to this very strong uptrend that we see. But the first thing we need to see if things are going to turn down is that weekly sell pivot. And just to, give you a recap, here's the weekly buy pivot there, with prices closing above the high of that lowest price candle. And since the start of the year, there hasn't been one weekly sell pivot. And there's our first one here now, after having a little false break of the all-time high. So a dangerous position. And so for me now, until we get the weekly buy pivot, I can say that the weekly downtrend is in place and can potentially take over. So we need to see a close back above the high of last week's trading for me to, start thinking we're going back up again. And the high of last week was 29.38 and a quarter. So I need to see a weekly close above there from here to change my view of being sort of short-term bearish. If we go and look at this up close, and this is where it gets a bit tricky for me, where I don't want to be giving too much to you, But from here, as I've been saying, it isn't necessarily just selling as soon as that weekly sell pivot is confirmed, although that could be the case with prices opening down 20 points on Monday. If things turn down rapidly, that really could happen. But what often is the case is that you'll see a bit of thrashing around before prices turn down. And, it could even have a break of the high, look like it's going up before turning back down again, which would shake all of those new shorts out of their position and get people bullish. Market is just fantastic at wrong footing everyone. So from here, the only thing I'll say is that if we see a move, up around 3,050 at this point, which is basically the length of this whole range above. So you've got this range for last week. If I look at that same distance above, if prices do get up there, then, watch out. It really can be heading higher. But in the meantime, until we get the weekly close above the high of that range, prices can actually spike before turning down again. But what is often the case is that it will possibly only have a slight retest of the high of that range just to make people think it's going up. That's a very often occurrence. There's a million ways that this can play out. It'll play out in a way that confuses everyone. But the point being that we do now have in place the weekly sell pivot after a false break of the all-time high in a market that was bought up on the basis of a deal going ahead and the Fed running to everyone's rescue. And in the last couple of weeks, we've had the deal break down and we've had the Fed come out and say they're not rushing to lower rates. So that's 2 from 2 to disappoint the market. And we're well overbought in the short term, and we now have the weekly sell pivot in place. So from here, I have to go onto a bearish footing, even if we see some attempted moves to the upside. So that is how it looks to me from this point forward. And if we do just quickly look at the Australian market, we have actually had a strong finish to the week. So really, being up around 6,300. This is on a weekly basis. You'll see similar to the US, where it's gone and retested the high from last year. And the low of that weekly candle, we did retest that area early in the week, which was also the 10-week moving average. But prices held at those strong support zones and has rallied. So, opening very high. And obviously it'll open a bit weaker this morning on the basis that the US market is down 20 points. So we are quite vulnerable up here. We're pretty high, and we have the election coming up on the weekend. So I just wouldn't be surprised to see a few people hit the sell button ahead of that, just in case the market doesn't respond well to whoever gets in. And I think, especially if Labor gets in, I can't imagine our market taking off to the upside, that's for sure. So it is a dangerous time. So I think our market resting near the highs here is vulnerable to some weakness. But until we get the weekly close below the low of the highest candle, we have to be wary that higher prices could be coming. So that low is 62.32 in the SPY. If US markets have a terrible week, well, we could turn down and really bucket and close the week out very low. But Still, I've just got to wait for that weekly confirmation on our market. Until then, this trend is very strong, but I just think this week our market is vulnerable, opening near the highs, and with so much sort of possible bearish scenarios likely to unfold over the next few weeks, I can't see us really busting out to new highs and going strong. But look, that can happen, and I am actually positioned for that to possibly happen. I haven't hit the sell button in getting aggressively short yet, because this trend is still so strong. But these other factors, the US-China trade spat and the election coming up, just has me wary of what this week could be. All right, well, that's it for this week. We'll see how it plays out and how the election plays out, and I'll come back with more next Monday. Cheers.